Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you all for watching. In this video, what I'd like to do is talk about Derek Parfit's 2012 essay, We Are Not Human Beings. And for those of you who know the paper, who've read the paper, you know that the paper could have been titled, We Are Not Human Animals. So Derek Parfit, he ends up developing a view in this paper that goes against the view that we are human animals. In this way, he challenges the animalist view, or the view that we are essentially biological organisms. So what I want to do in this video is take some time to be sure that we're clear on the fundamental project that's being undertaken in Parfit's piece, and then talk about who he's responding to, and then conclude this video by talking about a problem that he feels like he needs to address with the view that he's going to develop for his preferred theory of what we are, which is going to end up being a view that's antithetical to a view that would have it that we are essentially biological organisms. So this will be part one of a two-part video series on Parfit's 2012 essay, We Are Not Human Beings. Okay, so let's do some stage setting before we look at some initial passages from the Parfit piece. So recall that, for those of you who've read the piece, those of you who haven't, you're not recalling, teaching you for the first time, that Parfit, he is interested in the question, the big picture question of what we are. He doesn't take that question to be the same question as the question of personal identity, in as much as if we think that those questions are the same, then perhaps we're going to be begging the question at the outset that we are essentially persons. But there are those philosophers, notably those who hold views according to which we're biological organisms, or that we are our bodies, which would be antithetical to a view that would maintain that we're essentially persons. So Parfit respects the fact that we can think about the issue of what we are in very, very general terms, without begging any questions. As I've noted in other videos when I've talked about this subject matter, in particular videos on the work of Eric Olson and videos on the work of John Locke from the early modern period of philosophy, so many centuries ago even, you know that one of the ways in which philosophers have liked to enter or engage in thinking about the question of what we essentially are, what we fundamentally are, is by thinking about our persistence conditions, thinking about what it takes for us to continue to exist over time, despite the fact that we undergo change. Right? So in virtue of what am I the same thing that I am now compared to the individual I was, say, 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, 10 hours ago, 10 days ago, 10 months ago, 10 years ago, right? And the same thing could go for you in your case in thinking about persisting. So Parfit wants to provide an answer to that question, the question of what we are, in terms of the question, well, how do we persist? How do we essentially persist over time? So that latter question will serve as a guide for dealing with the big picture, very general question of what we are. Now, Parfit hit his main target, again, you may or may not know this, in his 2012 essay, is Eric Olson, in particular Eric Olson's animalism, as it's called, or his view of the biological approach of what we are. So according to Olson, as many of you may know, he thinks that we're essentially biological organisms, we're human organisms, we're human animals. So sometimes this position gets called animalism. And Parfit, you can understand him as saying, we're not animals, we're not human animals. The kind of animal we would be a human animal, of course. So the animalist, the view developed by philosophers like Eric Olson, would have it that what establishes that I am existing now compared to my existing 10 minutes ago, 10 hours ago, 10 days ago, 10 months ago, etc., is the fact that I continue to exist as the same biological organism. Now, on this view, it seems that one can't say that one is essentially anything psychological. So a contrasting view to the animalist view, to the biological approach view, is a view that's called a psychological approach view, which would have it that we persist by way of having, roughly speaking, the same psychologies, or sufficient continuity of psychological connectedness, or psychological states, or the like. So it's a psychological account, and it's different from the biological account. One reason for thinking that if the biological account is correct, we're not essentially something psychological, is that we were once fetuses. So Eric Olson, he develops a famous argument, infamous depending on where you settle on this debate, according to which we are to think about whether or not we were once fetuses. And so, according to Olson, he thinks it's just a fact of our experience. It's something that's obviously true, common sense thinking perhaps, that we were once fetuses. We once existed in our mother's womb. And if that's right, then it looks like at the early stages of our development, at the very least, we were not psychological. We were, as it were, biological, and we existed without something psychological being there. So that, according to Olson, provides some very, very compelling support for the claim that that the psychological approach is false and the biological approach, the animalist approach, is true. There are other arguments that Olson runs, but that's one, and the significant one, that he does develop. Now, Derek Parfit, he's going to end up challenging Olson, and he's not going to challenge Olson directly on the fetus argument. It's going to turn out that there's going to be another argument that Olson developed that Parfit's going to respond to, which we'll get to in a few minutes. But now, hopefully the stage has been set. Let me see if I can set up some of Parfit's work in, again, his 2012 essay, We Are Not Human Beings. So he begins, I have the paper here with me, I'll read a passage here, if you'll indulge me. So we can start with some science fiction. Here on Earth, I enter the teletransporter. So this is on page 1, the very first section of the paper. When I press some button, a machine destroys my body while recording the exact states of all my cells. Can you imagine this kind of technology? Maybe it's coming. This information is sent by radio to Mars, where another machine makes, out of organic materials, a perfect copy of my body. The person who wakes up on Mars seems to remember living my life up to the moment when I press the button, and is in every other way just like me. Okay? He continues, of those who would have thought about such cases, some believe that it would be I who wake up on Mars. So if I were to go through this teletransporter experience, I would wake up on Mars, and the same thing would be true in your case. He continues, they regard teletransportation as merely the fastest way of traveling. Imagine that form of traveling. Others believe that if I chose to be teletransported, I would be making a terrible mistake. On their view, the person who wakes up would be a mere replica of me, and thus not me. So there's different responses that one may have to thinking about this teletransporter case. Okay? Some would say that it is me, and others would say it's a replica of me. Now, those who are debating this, you can think about perhaps in the following way. You might think that if it is me, or in your case it is you, who survives teletransportation, if I can put it that way, then it can't be the case that you are your body or your organism, because you're going to have, guess what, a different body. You're going to have an exact replica, but it's going to be a different body, so you are not your body. So if you adopt something like the biological approach, you're likely to say, in this case, you made a serious mistake, because you basically brought about your non-existence. You brought about your death. But if you perhaps hold a psychological approach view, say you don't continue to exist over time, you do not persist in virtue of having the organism that you do, the body that you have, then you can say, oh yeah, I'd continue to exist, you'd continue to exist, you'd survive. Why? Because perhaps your psychology survives. Your psychology, as it were, persisted. Okay. So now that case isn't designed to, as it were, settle the debate. It's to get you thinking about the debate between the two different sides. If you do have powerful intuitions about it, and you could justify those intuitions, then perhaps you'd have something like an argument for one of the positions over the other. Of course, another position I should just note that Parfit recognizes as possible, but then dismisses, is a view according to which we're not our biologies or our psychologies, in the sense that we're thinking about our psychologies in terms of our brains, because you might think that how we persist, how we exist over time, despite the fact that we change, is by having the same soul, or having the same immaterial aspect of us. Parfit thinks that there's plenty of evidence, as he puts it, against this view, and so dismisses it and moves on, assuming that whatever we are, essentially, that persists is going to be something physical. Now, I'm not saying that Parfit's right about that. I'm just reporting his view. It could turn out that some view of immaterialism is true. I'll take no stand on that. But I'm just, again, noting Parfit's view and why that view doesn't feature in his paper in any prominent kind of way. So we should be feeling pretty good about the animalism psychological approach positions. We know how they differ from each other. I've, in other videos, talked about Olson's fetus argument. There's another argument, though, that he runs, and that's the one that Parfit's more interested in his in this essay from 2012. We can call it the too many thinkers problem. So that'll be the last bit that I'll discuss in this video before segueing to part 2 of the video series. So the too many thinkers problem, as opposed to the fetus argument problem. So the too many thinkers problem. So this is a problem that Olson runs. Parfit thinks he needs to respond to. There are other problems, but this is going to be the dominant one that I'll run through my video series here. And the idea is basically this. Olson claims, look, if we're going to say that we're not organisms, but that we are something psychological, it looks like we're going to have too many thinkers. Why? Because almost everybody thinks that animals think, so presumably we as animals think, our human animal thinks, so our organism has something thinking about it. Think about what it means to be a member of the species Homo sapiens. Okay, but also if we're not that organism, though, then there's something psychological about us that's distinct from our organism, and presumably that psychological thing thinks. So now you've got the organism that thinks, and then you have the psychology that thinks. You have two distinct thinkers, it seems, and that seems like there's too many thinkers, and because presumably, here's what's taken to be intuitive, there's only one thinker here, sitting in this chair, as Olson might put it. Olson goes on to say we have good reason to think that it's the animal, right, because we do think animals think, okay? But if you're going to deny that we're a human animal, then you have to take on, it seems like, this additional cost to your view, namely that there's more than one thinker sitting in my chair right now, and the same thing sitting in your chair, or standing up, or wherever it is that you happen to be. So that's the too many thinkers problem. I will look to discuss Parfit's discussion of it in part 2 of my video series. Thanks for watching.